This week at the Simon Says Stamp Monday Challenge blog, we're talking about, or rather our challenge is about the West, about cowboys, dusty things. Really, you could take your choice on how to interpret the challenge, but what I wanted to do for my entry was to talk to you about some base techniques to make things kind of old feeling. I guess I'm feeling inspired by dusty old West towns and that kind of thing. So what I'm going to be doing is sharing with you some aging techniques that I'm going to be showing you on tags. You could use on cards, scrapbook layouts, art journals, whatever you might want to use it on. First, I'm going to take, this is Evergreen Bough, and I'm using kind of a blue color because I think that's a nice base. And one of the things I find is I like kind of aquas, blues, and greens when I want to create something that's going to look very rusty and old. This can be a really fun color to give some contrast to that brown and that aged, distressed look. So I just covered my whole tag there, and I'm just hitting it with the heat tool to dry it off. You don't have to do this. I just like to have the layer dry, even if my very next step is going to be to flick it with water. Okay, so I've done that. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to use this burlap, since that's kind of a texture that I think about cowboys and horses and stuff. This burlap Tim Holtz stencil and a little bit of embossing paste. And I'm not going to put it over the whole entire thing, but I will just scrape some. And this is just like a popsicle stick that I've got. You could use anything you wanted here. And I'm going to let it be imperfect. I'm definitely going to let some of these holes you can see are only halfway full. Some of them are all the way full. I'm not going to have it be across the whole entire thing either. But once I'm satisfied, I will just lift that up. You can see I have all that great texture going on now. And I'll, of course, want to wipe this off. And what I'm going to want to do is apply some brown ink over this. But obviously, I'm going to want to wait for this to dry. You could use a heat tool to heat set it. But honestly, I think the better thing to do is to set it aside and play with something else in the meantime. So while I wait for that to dry, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to get out some Bundled Sage Distress Paint. And again, I'm going to work this over the area. And it's okay. I don't mind if I'm, what direction I'm going in. Top to bottom, sideways. Doesn't really matter because this is just our base coat, just to get some color on this tag. And I'm okay with seeing some of the manila color of the tag through as well. And you're going to want to let that totally dry. If it's still glossy, if it's still a little bit wet, you want to keep on heating it or just set it aside to dry. And now on this one, I'm going to take this Hero Arts wood grain stamp, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp over this. Now, it's not as long as my stamp, and the other thing that you'll notice is the way that I stamped this, I just did it very quickly and only pressed on the edges so that the wood grain is not entirely over my stamp, and I am okay with that because all I'm trying to do here is to kind of, not so much the wood grain, but just kind of to add an additional sense of texture here. And at this time, I'm also going to take a foam blending tool and come around the edges. Now, what you're going to notice is that the paint, the lovely Bundled Sage, is going to really peek through as I add this brown coating, and it's really going to show where my streaks are. Remember how I said I didn't mind if there were bits of manila showing through if I had streaks? That's definitely true here, and actually as I work here, I want to do the whole thing. I really am liking how this looks. And a couple things. First of all, I can see the wood grain here and there still. It's faint, but I can definitely still see that. If I wanted to get darker around the edges, I could apply directly to the ink pad because, of course, everything on here is either dry or this Gathered Twigs color anyway, so I can't hurt it. And I'm going to be just going along. You can see I'm kind of tilting it towards the front edge, and I'm intentionally getting a lot along these edges. I'm not, you can see along this side it's very faint, along this side it's much more pronounced. That is, I want it the more pronounced. And I'm not going completely flat against here, I'm just tilting it that way. And the reason for that is my next little aging step here. I'm going to go ahead and dry this totally. With the Distress inks, of course, it's not going to set it. It will still be reactive. However, I want it dry so that I don't get it all over my fingers and smear it all over with my next step. Once that is set, if you have a distressing tool, that would work great. If you don't, you could just use an open pair of scissors. Just be careful. And you're just going to scrape along the edge. And what this will do is it kind of roughs up and also tears the edge of that paper just a little bit. And once I'm done, I'm going to crumple my tag all the way up. And you might be thinking, okay, well, why didn't you do that first? The reason I tear the edges or rough up the edges first is because I find that once I've got my tag all scrunched up, it's harder to do it than it is with a crisp, clean piece of paper. So I like to do the edges first. And this part is always a good, I've got some aggression I need to get out, so let me just bundle up this paper. And you cannot mess this up. You can't be too rough with this part. You can't get too many different directions, or, you know, you have to remember the more you crumple it up, the more you mess with it, the more lines you're going to get. And if you do it too, you see how mine almost looks like it's in squares? So you have to make sure you just keep wadding it up and trying to break that paper down a little bit so it really lets you crumple it like it's been through the washing machine or something. Okay. And what I like about this is when we undo this, and now, you know, if I can come back here, I haven't added any ink, this just whatever ink is on there is left, and maybe rub it lightly. I can accentuate those raised lines. I might need a little bit more ink here, but I can very lightly go over this and accentuate those raised lines and really bring out how wrinkly that is. And depending on color, for example, if I hadn't gone with the green, if I had been all browns or creams, you could really get a look that really is leathery and really looks like you've got an old piece of leather or parchment or something here. And it's just so much fun and so quick how we went from this shiny new tag to this one. Speaking of shiny new tags, let me take this particularly shiny tag and give it the distress treatment. So I'm going to take this Tim Holtz wood grain stencil here. You can see I keep my Tim Holtz stencils all in a ring. I love that they have that hole in them. They're so easy for me to store and keep track of. And I'm going to go back to embossing paste again. I really like embossing paste with stencils or molding or modeling paste, any of those, because it's, well, it's a wet medium. It's not really fluid. Yeah, fluid's the word I want. So instead of being really difficult to apply and to get right, and you know, it soaks under the stencil and it's hard to get clean lines, it's a much easier product to use than, say, a mist, which, you know, if you use just exactly the wrong amount, it can leak and cause problems for you. And you can use just, I like to use just this plain white paste, because then I can come back through with color mediums and add color to it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm going to take some melted chocolate dilution spray and spray it. I'm also going to take some Midnight and some black marble. And again with the melted chocolate. The blue you're not going to see so vibrantly, but what it's going to do is really kind of give a richness to that black color. And when I lift this off, what you're going to see, it's not perfect, and that's okay, but because we've got all that paste that was there, it really keeps, for the most part, except a little bit right here in the middle, for the most part, it really prevents that mist from just absolutely seeping under and just completely taking over. I'm going to let this set aside to dry and we'll try something else. Okay, so here I have got a tag that I embossed. I used this stamp and black embossing powder and stamped and heat set that so it's raised and shiny, but we're going to make it not so shiny and play around with it a bit. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to color this, and I'm going to get in here with this melted chocolate again. I just really like this brown spray. It's just such a rich brown spray, and I can, you know, use my finger kind of, because I don't want it to have a misted look. I want it to have a really smooth look, and then I can wipe away excess pretty easily. Okay, and that gives us kind of a nice rich color. I'm also going to crumple it up a little bit, and that little bit of moisture from the mist is going to help me crinkle this up. And then I'm going to come in, and I've got just some sanding block here that I took out of the garage, and I'm going to sand a bit. And the sanding is going to remove some of that mist because it's removing some of that paper. And it's just kind of a little different way to go about making something look distressed. And by the way, the black embossed image, totally optional. You did not have to do an image, but the reason I have that here and what I'm showing you is when you sand a little bit of the sanding, it's not only taking off some of the color and some of the layer of paper around the edges, but it's also taking the shine off of the embossing powder. It's rubbing off like that top layer of shininess for the most part and really helping to make this look extra aged and distressed. So heading back to this first tag that we were working on, I'm going to take some, again with my brown, I love Gathered Twigs, Distress ink, and just lightly rub in a circular motion, and look at that. We're getting a nice brown color on top of that embossing paste. And you just want to make sure that it's dry first so that you're not messing up your design or adding embossing paste into your ink pad. And then I'll also go around the edges, kind of darken up the edges. I always think that gives it an added aged look when you darken up the edges of stuff. And you can also see that some of that background color is showing through the stencil design, and that's because the Distress ink is reactive with water, so the moisture in the paste, when it first goes on, it does soak up some of that color. I just love how you can get texture and color and all that going on there. And back to our wood grain, it's looking a bit messy, but I want to see what happens. I want to see what happens if I spritz it with a bit of water and encourage those dilutions mists there to kind of bleed and spread and all that. I want to see if I really get this tag wet, what we end up with here. And I know I'm spraying my mist a lot. My old mist bottle here is sadly dying out, and it is desperate for me to replace it. It barely wants to mist anymore. And I'm going to squirt this while it's so wet with a little more of that chocolatey brown. I like to do that sometimes when the paper's wet because, as you can see, the dilutions will be kind of, well, diluted. And what I like about this kind of thing is you can get kind of that wood grainy texture, but you can, it's also, it could be, doesn't have to be wood grain necessarily, it could be just some kind of abstract looking design or just a fun background. I really enjoy working on backgrounds on tags or just plain white cardstock because it lets me play with techniques and ideas without any stress about if it's going to turn out good or if it's going to look great or anything like that. One last thing, I'll see about playing with a metal embellishment because I think it can be fun to kind of add rust and patina to embellishments. And to do this one, I'm going to add this bright green, which you wouldn't think is, you know, making something look old. I'm going to use this bright green paint and then dry it. And when it's dry, you are going to want to be careful how you handle it because, of course, it is metal, so it could be very hot. But once I do know that it's dry, I'm going to just tap it here gently with some black archival ink. And I'm doing an archival or StazOn would work because I want to know that it's really going to stick there, that it's not going to rub off or interact or anything like that. So by brushing it over it like this, I'm only getting those raised spots. And again, I'm going to hit it with the heat tool just to let that ink dry and set. If you didn't have archival ink or paint, and by the way, any kind of paint would work just fine for this, any acrylic paint, you could also use alcohol inks. That would work really well as another alternative. Or if you're someone like me that has alcohol inks but doesn't use them enough, that would maybe be really good too. Then I'm going to take some antique bronze distress paint, and I'm going to just put a little here on my craft mat and just kind of scoot that through, and with my finger just kind of rub it in, not all over, but parts, just to, again, kind of get some of, if there's some of that if some of the spots are super bright green, it'll help with that, but also it just will kind of add to that old look there, but it's also going to add in for us some metallic finish, which of course we want to have that metallic finish, and that's dry almost instantly. And now I've got an embellishment here, kind of a fun patina, ready to go for my next project. I hope I've inspired you to play around with your supplies and try out some new things. This is the point in my video where it's time for me to go ahead and ride on away and do some more happy crafting of my own.